Alright, so if you guys can open up your workbooks and go to page 448, that would be great. Okay, so I want to review our vocab a little bit that we've talked about so far. First of all, I want to see if you remember what coefficients are, what constants are, and the difference between equations and expressions. Alright, so a coefficient is the number in front of a variable. So in this case, 4 is our coefficient. In this case, -8 is our coefficient. A constant is a number that stands alone. So that would be an example if we had x plus 3 equals 8. 3 and 8 are a constant because they're not being multiplied or divided by a variable. And then lastly, equations and expressions. Equations have equal signs, expressions do not. So remember, with an expression we simplify, and an equation we can actually solve since there's an equal sign and find a solution. So our new vocab word for this chapter, or for this lesson, is division property of equality. We've already done addition property of equality and subtraction property of equality. Remember, all this means is what I do to one side, I do to the other. So our first problem, notice I have it written over here. Yes, this is the correct work, but I want you to use the exact steps the way I was showing you before. So remember, what's the first step? The first step is always railroad tracks. So go ahead and put your railroad tracks in. And the next thing is find your variable. Where's your variable? I'm going to highlight it just so we know where it's at. I want that to be by itself. I want to isolate it, get it by itself. So I need to get rid of that 4. And in a case like this, to get rid of a plus 3, we would subtract. To get rid of maybe a minus 3, we would add 3. You're always doing the opposite. It's called inverse operations in math. Anytime I say inverse operations, I'm just asking you to do the opposite. So here we have, even though there's no symbol here, what operation are we doing? We're doing multiplication. So we're really taking 4 times x here. So we need to do the opposite of that, which would be division. Now you can write it 2 ways. You can write it divided by 4, or sometimes they use a fraction bar. Remember, fraction bars mean division, so it's divided by 4. That gives you kind of a clearer picture. 4 divided by 4, or 4 over 4, that's going to become a 1. That'll be 1x, where you could see here 4 divided by 4, that gives me 1x. Well, remember, we talked about this in the last chapter. 1x is the same thing as x. We don't really write that coefficient if it's a 1. So we have x over here, and on the other side, 20 divided by 4, we would get 5. Now remember, you always want to rearrange so that your variable comes first. And do not forget to check your solution. Always check at the end. So 20 equals 4 times 5. Put the parentheses in there. Alright, we're not putting x's for times symbols, and you can't just put 4, 5, because then it looks like 20 equals 45. So 4 times 5 equals 20? Yes, it does. I know that is the correct answer. The next one, same thing. First step is railroad tracks. Then, since I am multiplying right here, I'm going to divide, and I'll divide by -8. You want to cancel that entire coefficient, so you have to divide by -8 on both sides, because what you do to one side, you do to the other side. And let's refresh our memory on our multiplication and division rules with positives and negatives. So when we look at it, let's say a positive times a positive, you should know, is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. A positive times a negative is a negative. And a negative times a positive is a negative. Okay, so remember those are our rules. So here, negative divided by a negative, that's going to be a positive, and 8 divided by 8 is 1. So really, those cancel each other out. It's just the y left, which is what we wanted. Equals, and then on the other side, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and I know that 24 divided by 8 is 3. So let's try it out. Negative 8 times negative 3 equals positive 24. Well, negative times a negative is a positive. 8 times 3 is 24. That works. That's the correct answer. Now I want you to take a second and do the got it problems. Make sure you're doing all of the steps. Show all of your work, even the check at the end. When you do these problems, this is what your work should look like. For letter A, start with the railroad tracks, divide by that coefficient on both sides. When you do that, on the right side you have x, on the left side you get 5, so we know x is equal to 5, and let's check it. Remember, when you go to check, all you're doing is taking this equation, and instead of writing x, you're writing the number that we found, or the solution that we found. So 30 equals 6 times 5. That's true. So that's our answer. And here, remember, you have to take that negative with it. So I'm dividing by negative 6 on both sides. When I do that, negative 6 divided by negative 6 is just a 1a. And 36 divided by negative 6, well, positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 36 divided by 6 is 6. So let's check it. Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. Yep, that works. And the last one, we'll divide by our negative 9. Now, you don't really have to put the parentheses in, but I do just because otherwise sometimes my negative gets within that division symbol and I can't quite tell, is it just a really long division symbol or is it a negative? So you might want to put it in parentheses if you have a little bit of sloppier handwriting. So when I divide on this side, those really cancel each other out. All that's left is d, or a 1d, whichever way you want to look at it. And negative 72 divided by negative 9 would be a positive 8. So let's check it. Negative 9 times 8 is negative 72. Well, negative times positive is a negative, and I know that 9 times 8 is 72. That one works, so that is my answer. Now we're going to skip over a little bit. We're not going to do the story problems today, but we're going to bump down to the multiplication property of inequality. So, just like the other ones. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, I can't quite remember exactly what I said before the phone rang. So, multiplication property of inequality, it's just like the other properties of inequalities in saying that it just means what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. If I'm going to multiply by 2 on one side, I have to multiply by 2 on the other side. So, here's example 4. Remember, first step, always railroad tracks. Next thing, here's my variable. I want to get the variable by itself, so I have to get rid of this divided by negative 4. To do the opposite of division, it would be multiplication. So you have to multiply. Now, sometimes this looks a little bit confusing. When you go to multiply by negative 4, you're going to do it to the numerator. And remember, the numerator just means the top part. And sometimes people don't understand why that would cancel it out, but think about it. If I multiplied negative 4 times a, then I have negative 4a over negative 4. Well, just like before, when you have a number on the top and then on the bottom, in the numerator and the denominator, it's going to cancel out because a number by itself, or a number divided by itself, is 1. So those will cancel then, and what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So now I have to multiply by that negative 4 again. So on this side, all that's left is a 1a, or just a. And then on the other side, negative times a negative is a positive, and you don't have to put the symbol if you don't want to, 9 times 3 is 36. So my answer is 36. Let's check it. So 36 over negative 4 equals negative 9. Well, positive divided by negative is a negative, and 36 divided by 4 is 9. So that works. This is the correct answer. For today, it might really be helpful if you use your multiplication chart that I gave you at the beginning of the year if you're not so confident about your math facts. I don't want you to miss a problem just because you don't remember what 36 divided by 4 is. Go ahead and do your got it problems at the very bottom. Make sure you're showing your work, and then I'll show you the correct answers. Alright, so letter D, all the original problems are in black here. Letter D, you're going to multiply by negative 3 on both sides. Because remember, this is division, so we're going to do the opposite. The opposite would be multiply. Those would cancel out, and I'd have y. And negative times a negative is a positive. 8 times 3 is 24. And we check. 24 divided by negative 3 would give me a negative answer, and it's 8. Since that works, I know that's my answer. Next one, m over 5 equals negative 7. To get rid of the divided by 5, I multiply by 5 on both sides. Those would cancel out, and I'd have a 1m or just m. And I know that negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. When we go to check, negative 35 over 5, well, negative divided by positive is a negative. 35 divided by 5 is 7. And the last one, 30 equals b divided by negative 6. I'm going to multiply by negative 6 on both sides. And when I do that, these negatives would cancel and the 6's would cancel. So I'd be left with just b. And 30 times negative 6, well, positive times a negative is a negative. And think this through, guys. 3 times 6 is 18. I'm just going to tack a 0 on there. Rearrange it. B equals negative 180. Always have to have that variable first. When I go to check, I have 30 equals negative 180 over negative 6. Well, I know a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And again, think it through without the 0. Make it easier on yourself. 18 divided by 6 is 3, but I'm going to tack a 0 on at the end. I know that works. That is the correct answer. We are going to skip the other story problem, so we are done with this lesson. Make sure you are getting directions for what to do next. And if you have any questions, please make sure you are asking.